Have you ever wondered where your pet really comes from? A poodle or a pug doesn't just appear in the jungle or the tundra. You wouldn't find them there naturally. They exist because we care for them, breed them, shape them. They're the result of a shared history with humans, a story that spans thousands of years and, without exaggeration, changed the fate of both species. Dogs and cats aren't quirky whims of nature, but lineages molded by humans through selection, sometimes direct, sometimes indirect, through breeding and tastes that piled up generation after generation. They may look wildly different from one another, yet each remains a single species because they share over 99% of their DNA. And still, that DNA, so similar across breeds, is also very close to that of grey wolves in the Northern Hemisphere in the case of dogs. That genetic overlap forces the question that kicks off this journey. How did apex predators, social, hardy hunters like wolves, end up as animals that can sleep soundly on the couch, learn our routines, and look into our eyes like no other? And there are more puzzles. How did such a deep friendship arise between humans and two carnivorous lineages that should be dangerous at first glance, dogs and cats, deep enough to share homes, food, and affection? Where did today's enormous diversity of breeds come from? When did it all start? How long has it been from the first approach to the bond we feel today? How did this relationship shape our own cultural and social evolution? And perhaps most baffling of all, why do we now care for and love each other with such intensity? We'll try to answer these questions with the little, and at the same time enormous, amount we know about the enigmatic origins of friendship between humans and our two most influential carnivorous pets. To do so, we'll travel back in time to the last great ice age and peek at a planet unlike the one we know. A drier, colder Earth, with receding seas, advancing glaciers, and endless grasslands. Understanding that world is key to grasping when and how everything began. Here's a teaser. If you love your pets, what you're about to see will probably make you look at them with new eyes. This is the story of dogs and cats. Today, dogs and cats are wherever we are. In remote villages, megacities, islands, mountains, deserts. Especially for dogs, our shared history stretches far back. Certainly more than 30,000 years, and possibly over 50,000. Dogs descend from the grey wolf, Canis lupus, a species typical of the temperate and cold environments of the Northern Hemisphere. And although taxonomic debate persists, some classify the dog as a wolf subspecies, Canis lupus familiaris. Others raise it to species status, Canis familiaris. For the purposes of understanding its history, it doesn't matter. All modern breeds belong to the same domesticated population. Within that overwhelming variety, there are dogs forged for ice, hauling sleds with admirable endurance, hunting and herding dogs, guide dogs that give autonomy back to people with visual impairments, guardians, sentries, and above all, companions. There may be no two species so different in appearance, and yet so able to understand each other as humans and dogs. Dogs distinguish words and attach meanings to them. Objects, commands, feelings, and experiments with sound button boards have shown that when trained, they can combine terms to express simple but precise ideas. I'm hungry, I want to go out, I prefer that toy. In other words, they don't speak because their anatomy doesn't allow it, not because they don't understand. They interpret voice, tone, gestures. They learn to read our intentions. Cats, for their part, tend to involve themselves less in our antics. They're reputed to be more stubborn, more independent, less willing to be trained. That doesn't make them less intelligent. They simply don't feel obliged to respond to every demand. They can identify patterns, intentions, and emotional states, and the fact that they usually choose when to participate doesn't mean they don't connect. They do, but on their terms, with rubs, purrs, and timely, quiet presence. Hence the almost humorous rivalry between dog people and cat people. We choose a mirror. And although both are carnivores that ended up in our homes, their evolutionary paths are markedly different. Physically, cats are more flexible and articulated. They move across furniture and shelves with a confidence we rarely see in dogs, who are more comfortable and competent on the ground. That difference isn't accidental. It speaks to lineages and environments. Domestic cats, Felis catus, descend from a wild form very similar to them, native today to Africa and the Near East, though in the past their range was broader, and their domestication is more recent. Roughly 10,000 years ago, coinciding with the dawn of the agricultural revolution and the transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene. To understand how both stories, the canine and the feline, were forged, it helps to jump back much further, about 23 million years, from the Paleogene to the Neogene. During the Paleogene, the first chapter of the Age of Mammals, the planet still resembled the dinosaurs' Earth: warm, humid climate, dense vegetation spread wide. But starting around 23 million years ago, the world began to dry and cool. Savannas, grasslands, and tundras expanded. Forests opened up, plants changed, and with them, animals. With that shift, communities were renewed. Many dominant forms went extinct. Modern mammal groups consolidated and diversified, among them the order Carnivora, which today includes about 280 living species. Here we should clear up a common confusion. Carnivore in the dietary sense isn't the same as carnivora in the taxonomic sense. A carnivore is any animal that eats meat. Carnivora is the mammalian order that includes, among others, caniforms and feliforms. Many dietary carnivores belong to Carnivora, but not all Carnivora members are strictly carnivorous. Omnivorous bears, for instance. Among the caniforms we find canids, wolves, foxes, dogs, and the arctoids, bears, raccoons, coatis, mustelids, and within the latter, a surprise to many, pinnipeds, seals, and elephant seals, very successful marine mammals that descend from terrestrial ancestors within Carnivora. An important anatomical difference: many arctoids are plantigrade, they place the whole foot on the ground, with articulated digits and freer shoulder blades, which allows them to climb, manipulate, even walk comfortably on two legs. Caniforms, by contrast, tend to be digitigrade, they walk on their toes. This design, less suited for climbing but more efficient for running, favors quadrupeds specialized for open environments, capable of covering long distances in pursuit of hoofed prey. There's also an extinct related lineage worth mentioning: Amphicyonids, the bear dogs, with traits intermediate between canids and arctoids, characterized by a plantigrade posture, long fur, and robust tails. Their existence suggests what the common ancestor might have been like, and how, after splitting, each branch explored different strategies. In the other major block of the order are the feliforms, our cats, but also lions, tigers, hyenas, and civets. They share with caniforms the carnassial teeth, true blades for slicing meat and cracking bone, but have a more elastic, articulated skeleton that lets them pass through tight spaces, use the tail for balance, and turn the spine into a spring that fires leaps that multiply their size. They're often better adapted to closed or mixed environments, and their tails, much more controllable than those of most caniforms, give them a tightrope walker's edge. A classic feline trait: retractable claws, protected and always ready. The likely common ancestor between feliforms and caniforms may have resembled a genet, a medium-sized generalist living in an era with predators very different from today's. Among the most striking were the entelodonts, animals with massive heads nicknamed hell pigs, or on another continent, the Forus rachidae, terror birds, over 2 meters tall, that dominated South America when that continent was isolated for tens of millions of years. There, they shared the stage with singular predators like Thylacosmilus, a saber-toothed marsupial, and with giant terrestrial crocodiles like the formidable Barynosuchus. In the Old World, competition came from stem lineages close to Carnivora, such as Oxyaenids and Hyenodonts, big, with teeth and jaws built to crush bone, specialists in Paleogene megafauna and the dawn of the Neogene. For a long time, they relegated the true carnivorans to secondary roles, often nocturnal. But the climate changed, and with it, the evolutionary chessboard. The more archaic lines went extinct, and the more versatile groups prospered. Today, there are native caniforms and feliforms on every continent except Antarctica. In Africa and Asia, felines took the top predator niches. In northern Eurasia and North America, caniforms like bears and wolves stood out as principal hunters. Among them, the polar bear stands out, the heaviest terrestrial carnivore today, adapted to a semi-aquatic life on ice, with a tough diet specialized in marine mammals. The last continent modern carnivores reached was South America, during the Great American Biotic Interchange between 5 and 3 million years ago, when the Isthmus of Panama finally joined the Americas. The flows went both ways. Northward went giant sloths, terror birds, carnivorous marsupials, and giant armadillos. Southward came the ancestors of jaguars and the maned wolf, among many others. The arrival of so many northern lineages swept away and replaced much of the native fauna, and new predators established themselves, including saber-toothed cats and ancient South American canids like Protocyon, which left no living descendants. Those ecosystems were intensely competitive before we ever appeared on the scene. Long before forging an inseparable bond with humans, nature was already shaping in wolves the qualities that would later make our friendship possible. They were apex predators, social, with complex hierarchies and cooperative behavior. Life in a pack demands social intelligence, reading signals, planning, collaborating, and competing without destroying the group. That cognitive sophistication makes them among the sharpest mammals. A typical pack revolved around a monogamous dominant pair and several generations of offspring that hunted large hoofed prey. Precisely those social skills became the bridge when, on our side, an unusual ecological opportunity arose. They allowed two species that could have been enemies to understand each other. As we expanded eastward and northward during the Pleistocene, we entered lands dominated by wolves. For a time, they may have been our predators as much as we were a threat to them. But a shared challenge may have nudged us toward cooperation. The last glacial maximum. About 26,000 years ago, the Ice Age reached its peak. Glaciers advanced, forests withdrew, sea levels fell by more than 120 meters, and the climate became colder and drier. This scenario aligns with the first firm traces of wolves and humans walking together. Some studies point to Siberia as the main origin of the ancestral population of modern dogs, precisely in that period of isolation forced by the ice. It's possible, however, that domestication was multi-regional, with independent episodes in what are now China and the Middle East. Adding to an already complex story, later breed creation reduced genetic diversity and mixed signals, complicating the reconstruction of recent relationships. Both wolves and dogs suffered local extinctions, and present-day genetics doesn't clearly reflect the exact paths, but the overall direction is clear. Archaeology adds concrete scenes to this intuition. Human burials that include dogs, bones that reveal shared diets, cut marks on prey suggesting coordinated hunts. Where ice imposed hunger and silence, collaboration multiplied the odds of bringing home food. And in exchange for leftovers, the warmth of the fire and shelter on the margins, para-wolves, those less fearful individuals, offered early warning and a prodigious nose. The first social contract between species may have been written, without words, by parallel tracks on fresh snow. Over time, that pre-contract became coevolution. Dogs and humans got better at reading each other. Dogs learned to follow a hand gesture, a line of sight. Humans learned to interpret a bark by its timbre and context. In neurobiological terms, living together modulated stress and reward systems. Hormones like oxytocin and vasopressin began to act not only within a species, but across species. That we can look into each other's eyes without fear is perhaps one of the most improbable achievements of recent evolution. The lineage that gave rise to our domestic cats played a different role in their ecosystems. The African wildcat, also found historically in the Middle East and less arid Mediterranean zones, is small, solitary, opportunistic. It eats lizards, amphibians, birds, and small mammals. It prefers warm, dry environments, savannas and scrub, and its three-dimensional anatomy, flexible spine, mobile shoulder girdle, makes it a forest acrobat. Its strategy: silent steps, patient approach, lethal pounce. It runs well, yes, but more to escape than to hunt. Most wildcats would look a lot like a typical house cat. The key differences are behavioral: more timidity, greater aggressiveness toward humans. They didn't hold the top of the food chain. That role belongs to other felines, especially the genus Panthera. But they were important mid-level predators. In Africa, the lion is the great actor, a social colossus over 250 kilos, with hierarchies, rituals, and clear sexual dimorphism. It hunts hoofed animals, like wolves do in the north, but on the savanna. In that web, other caniforms and feliforms occupied medium or small niches. Few species competed with lions as equals, except hyenas, also social feliforms with complex clans. When wildcats began to exploit human-shaped spaces, they were already abundant in their niche along the Fertile Crescent. Meanwhile, humans were living through a quiet revolution. For roughly the past 70,000 years, our species experienced a cognitive explosion: art, symbols, and complex language. Sculptures and cave paintings attest to it. It was the maturation of our most powerful tool, language. More words, more concepts, more capacity to tell stories, to remember, anticipate, plan, and build. That cultural sophistication may have favored sociability and cooperation, and there's a hypothesis that we self-domesticated in a sense. Less aggressive, more communicative, and technologically savvy groups transmitted their knowledge more effectively. It's no surprise that those kinds of humans were more likely to approach the right wolves. In the world of cats, the engine was different. The agricultural revolution seeded grain stores, and grain drew pests, rodents like an ocean moving under houses. In that improvised abundance, the cat found a feast. It didn't need to grasp our gestures or learn our words. It just had to tolerate our proximity. In exchange for tolerance and, over time, affection, we got biological pest control. The tacit granary deal was a second grand experiment in cross-species cohabitation, quieter, subtler, yet effective. Cultural evidence from the Pleistocene shows that when dogs were already part of our lives, we bid them farewell with ritual, we buried them. That gesture increased their chances of preservation and lets us know some of the oldest today. Genetics and zooarchaeology suggest that, from a certain point, we dispersed together. Dogs likely accompanied the first humans to reach the American continent, crossing Bering when there was still a land bridge. They also joined us on early sea voyages as we spread across archipelagos. 5,000 years ago, humans and dogs shared almost every continent except Antarctica. In Egypt, our relationship reached explicit symbolic depth. We didn't just live together, they were mummified, embalmed, depicted in reliefs and myths. Anubis, with a canine head, became a sacred figure. Pet remains were offered to the gods. Their presence went beyond the utilitarian. Domesticate comes from the Latin domus, home, to bring into the house. But in the case of dogs and humans, the relationship began before the house. It arose while we were still hunter-gatherers at the end of the Pleistocene. They were the only animal that co-evolved with us during that pre-agricultural phase, the first to cross the threshold of our cultural history, and perhaps the only ones for thousands of years. They cleared the way for later domestication of dozens of species, though none with such a deep bond. Cats also entered the symbolic sphere. From the Near East to the Nile Valley, their figure appears tied to fertility, household protection, and pest control. Iconography elevates them without betraying their essence. They remain hunters even when painted with collars. Their spread along sea routes and caravans carried them to islands and ports throughout the Mediterranean, and later to almost anywhere that had ships. Few animals adapt as well to holds and docks as a hungry, patient cat. Everyone who lives with a dog or cat today unknowingly keeps a living evolutionary experiment at home. Selection accumulated generation after generation produces lines so different they seem like separate species. It shaped not only morphology, sizes, colors, proportions, but also behavior, temperament, and sociability. That, in fact, is the most astonishing part. We have guard dogs, herders, hunters, swimmers, lapdogs, but they share one trait: docility toward human will and a profound attachment. And the love was mutual. Why do we keep feeding them, caring for them, letting them into our beds, even when their material usefulness has vanished for most? How could this friendship begin and benefit both sides? We often picture domestication as slow, taking millennia. Sometimes it is, but we also underestimate the power of selection. A famous example is the silver fox experiment in Siberia, launched in the mid-20th century and still ongoing, with dozens of generations selected solely for tameness toward humans. Beyond temperament, collateral traits appeared: behavioral neoteny, puppy-like behavior persisting, shorter fur, white patches, curly tails, floppy ears, and bigger eyes. This set of traits is known as the domestication syndrome. The reason is genetic. Genes influencing stress response and sociability also affect other developmental pathways before and after birth. It's a domino effect, pleiotropy. You tweak one dial and several move. In dogs, domestication also touched digestion and smell. Some populations evolved more copies of genes tied to starch digestion, an adaptation to human diets rich in cereals and tubers. In cats, what adapted most was social tolerance and coat variability. Their metabolism remained that of a strict carnivore with specific nutritional needs. That's why humanizing diets carelessly is dangerous. Emotional closeness doesn't dissolve millions of years of specialization. How did it happen with dogs and cats? There are two general models. The first is intentional domestication. Humans capture, breed, and select to exploit strength, milk, or meat, as later happened with horses, cattle, and goats. The second is self-domestication. Animals benefit on their own from living near us, without a conscious human plan at first. This second model fits dogs and cats better. Humans produced waste, food scraps, bones, hides. The less fearful, more tolerant individuals approached to feed. Not everyone could. Only those who managed just the right distance and fear level got the reward. Over many generations, those tamer, more curious individuals thrived, and their descendants more so. An ecotype of wolf was born, specialized in living around our settlements. This idea is called the garbage dump theory, and it's widely accepted today to explain the first transitional phase. Natural selection favored more social, less fearful wolves near us. The more aggressive or skittish stayed away, remaining wild wolves. On our side, we soon discovered these animals warned of intruders with their barks, tracked scents, and helped hunt. Cooperation grew. We offered food and shelter. They offered vigilance, defense, and companionship. For the first time, two different species shared not just territory, but goals and emotions. Along the way, both brains changed. Dogs evolved extraordinary sensitivity to our signals: glances, hands, tones. Their hormonal system responds to contact with us by elevating oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone, just as ours responds to them. Biologically, affection toward a dog activates circuits similar to those of parental love. That's no accident. It's the imprint of thousands of years of cohabitation and co-adaptation. For cats, the granary alliance model fits: grain, rodents, cats, human tolerance. Here, human selection was initially passive. Favor individuals that were more sociable, don't harm them, and let them sleep under a roof. Later, in urban contexts, we began to select for coat patterns, hair length, and more open temperaments. But the hunting core remained almost intact. That's why even a very cuddly cat can switch in seconds from purring to stalking a shadow on the wall. Language, brain, and the mirror they hold up to us. Some suggest dogs boosted aspects of our empathy, cooperation, and sense of community, a mixed pack that increased both species' odds of survival. It's no surprise that great civilizations, Mesopotamia, Egypt, lived with dogs and cats, weaving them into myths and rituals. Over millennia, dogs diversified into breeds, sizes, coats, temperaments, and although we forget their wild origins when we see them asleep belly up, Inside each beats the memory of a wolf that, once upon a time, chose to trust. We changed too. Domestication isn't one-sided. It transforms everyone involved. Our schedules, the layout of our homes, how we socialize, even how we play with babies, throwing a ball, pointing at objects, sharing food, were reinforced by the presence of dogs and cats. The words we use for affection, faithful, cuddly, guardian, independent, gained richer meaning by living with them. And in the brain, our map of the other sharpened. We learned to read ears, tails, postures. They learned to read eyebrows, hands, pupils. If this story makes us proud, it also obliges us. In recent times, breed selection has sometimes favored aesthetics over welfare. Muzzles so short they hinder breathing, spines too long, wrinkled skin prone to infection. We love our companions. We must care for them knowledgeably. Animal welfare science reminds us that the bond isn't just affection. It's the responsibility to provide environment, nutrition, health, behavior, and freedom from fear and pain. For cats, uncontrolled freedom has ecological costs. Feral populations can impact native fauna, especially on islands. Living together requires sensible policies, responsible neutering, environmental enrichment, play, and stimulation that respect their nature. It's not all warnings. There are new forms of cooperation too. Detector dogs trained to find people under rubble, to sniff hazardous substances or disease. Therapy dogs that modulate mood in hospitals and care homes. Cats that accompany grief or anxiety with a serene presence. Usefulness has returned, but in a different key: care and mental health. Picture a camp on the late Pleistocene steppe. A ring of stones shields the fire from the wind. At the edge, shadows, clean bones gleaming with frost. Two figures approach, not pure wolves, at least not entirely. They stop at a measured distance. One lets out a deep bark when something cracks beyond the tree line. A human sits up, grabs a torch, and looks. There's no attack. There's a warning. In that micro-gesture, an alliance was born. Now jump to an adobe village millennia later. The granaries hold grain. Night brings tiny squeaks from the rafters. A striped-backed, slant-eyed feline slips under the door. It isn't looking for our hand. It's looking for movement. It pounces, clamps down, and bites. In the morning, someone leaves a bowl of milk. It isn't necessary, but the gesture opens another door. The habit of letting that small hunter share a roof. Modern genetics can trace migrations, bottlenecks, and hybrids, but the story of dogs and cats includes shadows, populations that vanished, lines mixed until their marks were lost. Some dogs accompanied entire peoples and went extinct with them, cats that colonized islands with travelers and then blended into local populations. Even today, feral dogs and wolves can interbreed in some places, and the same is true for domestic cats and wildcats. The boundary isn't always crisp. Recognizing that porosity doesn't diminish the narrative, it makes it truer. Domestication wasn't a single event, but a constellation of processes that flickered on and off over millennia. Anatomy doesn't lie. Caniforms, digitigrade, optimize trotting and running. Long strides, economical movement, tendons as springs. Many arctoids, plantigrade, make up for it with functional hands, claws for climbing, and flexible wrists. Feliforms refine the third dimension, whip-like spines, floating shoulder blades, tails that write curves in the air. When your dog looks at you waiting for the ball, there's a metronome in their chest set to miles run after herds of ungulates. When your cat leaps from a shelf and lands without a sound, their body rehearses balance tricks honed among branches and rocks. Cultures inscribe dogs and cats into their cosmologies, in tombs and temples, in stories and proverbs, in paintings, ceramics, and textiles. Dogs guiding souls, cats protecting the home from spirits and rodents. Later, with global expansion, they reached European palaces, Andalusian patios, Andean courtyards and Asian markets, and into film, literature, music. Domestic companions turned universal symbols. Few figures have traveled so well between local myths and global modernity. Every day, life becomes a lab. A home experiment. Point, with your index finger to 2 cups, one with a hidden treat, and see if your dog follows the gesture. Odds are they will. Now try with your cat. Maybe it looks at you, maybe not. It might read the movement of your eyes more than your finger. That's not random indifference. It's different cognitive strategies. Dogs, molded by thousands of years of reading human signals, respond better to explicit gestures. Cats, more sensitive to subtle movement and faint sound, act when the incentive is clear and the context suits them. It's not an intelligence contest, it's a choreography of niches. In both, play serves a function. It isn't just entertainment, it's skills practice. Chasing a string, fetching a ball, hiding a treat, the brain wires itself while having fun. For us, play is also a language. I get you, you get me. And language generates a future, routines, schedules, expectations. Anyone with a dog knows the walk schedule doesn't fail. Anyone living with a cat knows that the first ray of sun brings requests in soft or insistent meows. And though humans today know a lot, we still have questions. How many times, in how many places did dog domestication start? And how many fizzled out before taking hold? How much of the domestication syndrome is explained by changes in neural crest cells during development? To what extent did proximity to humans modify cats' communicative repertoire, their human-directed vocalizations, relative to their natural calls? These aren't mere technicalities, they sharpen the story of a broader us. We live in cities that sometimes weren't designed for animals. And yet, they're here. The future of the Alliance lies in designing pet-friendly cities with parks, safe routes, climate shelters, in rethinking housing and work, telepresence, flexible schedules, for lifestyles that integrate care. Technology helps. Sensor collars, precision veterinary medicine, smart environmental enrichment. But the essence remains analog. Time, attention, presence. An unhurried walk, a shared nap, and an impromptu game are worth more than any gadget. Today, after the fade of the glacial eras and the disappearance of many great predators, the descendants of that trusting wolf and that opportunistic cat walk among us. They remind us that evolution isn't only competition and teeth. It's also cooperation, symbiosis, and empathy. Perhaps that ancient alliance altered the planet's course more than we imagine. It changed how we hunted, how we traveled, how we organized, how we feel. In our present, dogs and cats are inseparable parts of who we are. Dogs embody cooperation, teamwork, the trust that's earned over time and renewed every morning when they wag their tails at the sight of us. Cats, for their part, are the elegance of independence, the connection to the mysterious, the presence that reminds us the wild also fits in the everyday. Two different ways of approaching the human, one through explicit loyalty, the other through shared freedom. Both spring from the same evolutionary force, sociability, the ability to understand the other and find, in difference, a chance to survive together. Every bark and every purr are echoes of a campfire lit tens of thousands of years ago, when the earth was sheathed in ice and we learned to tell stories to keep us together. Since then, we've walked in parallel, sharing shelter, food, and affection. We are, in a sense, part of the same home, the same fire. Science can pass genes, mutations, and adaptations, but there's a bedrock that goes beyond data, the emotional bond. No single mutation suffices to explain love. That's built by daily life, by glances, habits, time. When a dog waits for us by the door, or a cat curls up in our lap, it isn't responding to an immediate utility calculation. They answer to an emotional memory forged over thousands of generations that learned that being near humans could mean being safe. And we learned that caring for them makes us better, more empathetic, more human. Perhaps that's why, in a world that never stops changing, this alliance persists as one of the few true constants, love across species. If we had to condense the influence of this relationship into a single line, we'd say few interactions have shaped the behavior, evolution, and culture of two species as much as the one that binds us to dogs and cats. They changed with us. We changed thanks to them. If dogs represent companionship, loyalty, and cooperation, cats embody mystery, contemplation, and chosen freedom. Together, they're a mirror of our two halves, the one that longs to belong and the one that needs to be free. And perhaps when we look at them, what we really see is our own reflection. Proof that even on a planet sharpened by competition, empathy and coexistence can be the most powerful way to evolve. Now, let's return to the details, the fine gears that kept this great story intact. In the canine trunk, that pack sociability was key. In the tundra and steppe of the late Pleistocene, wolves and humans competed for the same prey. Overlapping diet and territory created conflict, yes, but also repeated contact. In times of scarcity, like during the last glacial maximum, proximity to human camps offered a resource: scraps, bones, fat, hides. Individuals with lower stress reactivity, more curiosity and tolerance took the first risk. That was the embryo of the para-human ecotype. Over generations, their stress physiology shifted, their flight distance shortened, and cooperation strengthened. Humans, already bonded by language and culture, soon noticed that these friendly wolves were living alarms, hunting partners, night watch. With dogs, hunting could become more efficient. With dogs, vigilance multiplied. With dogs, human groups dared colonize even harsher environments. In the feline lineage, the engine was different: agricultural sedentism. Where there's grain, there are rodents. Where there are rodents, a silent hunter finds a niche. Cats didn't need to learn our commands. They needed us to store grain. In that tacit bargain, they offered biological control, and we offered tolerance, warmth, and shelter. Affection came later. But their hunter identity, the stalk, the leap, the preference for high, narrow spaces, never fully dissolved. That's why a cat strolls along shelves without effort, and a dog prefers the floor. These are bodies telling themselves their own past. Anatomy tells stories. Caniforms, digitigrade, are optimized to trot and run, long stretches, chases, and economical movement across open plains. Arctoids, plantigrade, gain functional hands, climbing, manipulating, rummaging. Feliforms, with elastic spines and fine tails, dominate the third dimension, jumping, turning mid-air, and landing on their feet. And that catalogue of forms arises from millions of years of climate-opening ecosystems, plants changing their physiology, and prey evolving. It's ultra-slow-motion chess. At that scale, it's no surprise that when humans entered the game with our own arsenal of culture and technology, we found allies ready to recognize us. Archaeology offers unforgettable scenes: dog burials alongside humans, bones bearing the marks of shared life, coordinated steps in the fossil record into the Americas across Beringia. Later, Egyptian iconography immortalizes devotion. Even in worlds so different, steppe hunter-gatherers, Nile farmers, the bond appears. That tells us something profound. The relationship wasn't a local accident. It surfaced again and again, wherever ecology allowed it. And if we look at genetics, we find confirmations and questions. We know dogs and wolves share a recent past, but bottlenecks, artificial selection, and local extinctions blurred the map. Something similar happens with cats. Their morphological similarity to the wild form is such that they're sometimes hard to tell apart, and the difference shows up in behavior. That ancestral timidity, softened in the domestic cat, was probably the first threshold to cross. You don't need to transform the body to transform cohabitation. It's enough to nudge the fear dial a few degrees. By now, it's impossible to ignore the emotional component. Studies show that eye contact between a dog and a human triggers oxytocin in both. It's the chemical glue of caregiving relationships. It isn't poetic to say we love each other. It's descriptive. And it doesn't lessen rigor to recognize that this love emerged because it was often useful. It improved hunting, safety, and well-being. But over millennia, it stopped being explained only by utility. Today, that reciprocity is sustained by shared history, habit, culture, and, of course, the pleasure of company. No other cultural tool, not the wheel, nor the plough, nor iron, looks at you like that when you come home. If the garbage dump theory explains the start with dogs, the Granary Alliance explains the start with cats. In both cases, selection favored specific temperaments, lower aggression, higher tolerance of proximity, curiosity, and behavioral plasticity. With dogs, intentional human selection soon stepped in to polish abilities: herding, guarding, hunting, and sledding. With cats, the polishing was subtler: selection for coats, patterns, and more sociable characters, while leaving the hunting core intact. And so we reach the present. In a modern home, you can see coexisting the shadow of the wolf and that of the wildcat. When the dog brings you a ball again and again, it stages centuries of cooperation and social play. When the cat settles on the highest ledge, it reenacts its mastery of the third dimension. When the dog barks at someone approaching, it fulfills the ancestral role of alarm. When the cat slips silently after a kitchen insect, it activates the same program that guided it through tall grasses. These are memories inscribed in body and behavior. One last reflection. What does this bond say about us? It says that, faced with a harsh world, we learned to seek allies, that we saw value where others saw danger, that we cultivated empathy enough to include another predator in our circle of trust, that we understood, through practice, not theory, that cooperation multiplies life. If evolution is change with inheritance, then love across species is also a survival strategy. A beautiful one. So next time you look at your dog or cat, remember, you're not just seeing a domestic animal. You're seeing a story that began in ice and savannas, crossed continents and oceans, stoked campfires and carved gods, invented jobs and games, buried its dead with honors, and today simply curls up at your side. The evolution of pets is, at heart, our own evolution told in another voice. And maybe that's why, whatever happens out there, this alliance will keep reminding us who we were, who we are, and who we can remain when we choose empathy.